Most people in that ballroom saw a little girl holding her mother's cleaning bucket, but Ethan Kong saw fear. The crystal chandeliers of the Whitmore Grand Hotel spilled golden light across hundreds of perfectly dressed guests as Chicago's elite laughed over champagne and million-dollar donations at the Children's First Charity Gala. Women in glittering gowns floated across the marble floor, while men in tailored tuxedos shook hands beneath towering floral arrangements imported from Beverly Hills that morning. The air smelled like expensive perfume, polished wood, and money. At the edge of the ballroom, almost invisible beside the catering station, 8-year-old Mia Brooks tightened her fingers around the strap of her faded pink backpack while her mother wiped fingerprints from silver trays nearby. Rachel Brooks had worked 3 straight shifts that week cleaning downtown offices and luxury hotels, and exhaustion hung beneath her eyes no matter how hard she smiled at guests. "Stay close to me tonight, baby," she whispered softly without looking up from the tray she polished. "This event's important." Mia nodded silently. She rarely spoke much anymore. Most people assumed she was shy. Others thought something was wrong with her. But Mia noticed things adults ignored. She noticed which men smiled too quickly, which women looked scared behind expensive jewelry, which security guards kept touching their earpieces when nobody was talking. And tonight, from the moment they entered the ballroom through the staff elevator nearly an hour earlier, something had felt wrong. Then the room changed. Conversations softened almost instantly as a group of men entered through the main doors surrounded by quiet bodyguards in dark suits. Ethan Kong walked at the center of them with the calm stillness of someone completely used to power. At 38, the Korean-American businessman carried himself with the kind of controlled silence that made people move out of his way before he even looked at them. His black tuxedo fit perfectly against broad shoulders, and the silver watch at his wrist probably cost more than Rachel made in 5 years. But it wasn't his wealth that unsettled people. It was his eyes. Cold, sharp, patient, like a man who missed nothing. Mia froze the second she saw him. Across the ballroom, Ethan casually accepted a handshake from a senator while one of his bodyguards scanned the crowd near the exits. Nobody noticed the tiny girl standing beside a housekeeping cart. Nobody except Ethan himself. His eyes shifted once across the room, then stopped. Mia immediately looked down at the floor. Her breathing quickened, because standing near the champagne tower beside 2 smiling donors was a man she recognized from somewhere else. Not from school, not from television, somewhere darker. Somewhere her nightmares still remembered. The man gave her a warning look from across the ballroom, subtle enough nobody else would notice. Mia's fingers trembled around her backpack strap. Rachel leaned closer. "Sweetheart." But Mia wasn't listening anymore. Ethan Kong had started walking through the ballroom, toward the VIP table near the stage, bodyguards trailing behind him like shadows. As he passed within a few feet of the cleaning station, Mia suddenly lifted her hand beneath chest level and quietly formed 3 small signs with her fingers. Quick, precise, deliberate. Ethan stopped walking immediately. One of the bodyguards nearly bumped into him before catching himself. The ballroom music continued playing softly in the background, while wealthy guests kept laughing into crystal glasses completely unaware that the most dangerous man in the room had gone perfectly still. Ethan slowly turned his head toward the little girl beside the housekeeping cart. And for the first time that night, his expression changed. The laughter inside the ballroom suddenly sounded distant to Ethan Kong, like noise underwater. His bodyguards exchanged confused glances as he stood motionless beside the cleaning station, staring at the tiny hand signal the little girl had formed beneath the edge of her backpack. Most people would have missed it completely. 3 fingers, thumb folded inward, quick wrist turn. But Ethan recognized it instantly because he had seen photographs of that exact signal buried inside confidential reports years ago. Human trafficking. Survivors used it when they were too afraid to speak openly. His jaw tightened almost invisibly. "Sir?" one of his security men asked quietly beside him. Ethan did not answer right away. His eyes remained fixed on Mia Brooks, who immediately lowered her hand and stared down at her worn sneakers as though she regretted doing it. Rachel noticed the tension at once. Her face lost color. "I am sorry, sir," she said quickly, stepping protectively in front of Mia. She did not mean any disrespect. Ethan ignored the apology completely. Instead, he crouched slightly so his eye level matched the little girl's. The movement alone shocked nearby guests because men like Ethan Kong did not lower themselves for anyone. "Who taught you that sign?" he asked calmly. Mia's fingers tightened around the backpack strap. She did not answer. Around them, the gala continued glowing with artificial warmth. Waiters carried silver trays stacked with filet mignon and lobster tails while a jazz band played softly beneath the chandeliers. Nobody noticed the sudden stillness surrounding Ethan Kong except the people closest to him. Rachel looked terrified now. "Mia does not talk much," she whispered carefully. "Please, sir, she is a good child." Ethan finally looked at Rachel for the first time. Her housekeeping uniform sleeves were rolled neatly above tired wrists, and the skin beneath her eyes carried the deep exhaustion of someone surviving paycheck to paycheck in a city that punished weakness. He had seen thousands like her growing up in Queens before power changed his world. Then his attention returned to Mia. The child slowly lifted her eyes toward him again, and Ethan immediately noticed something else. Fear. Not ordinary nervousness. Not childish shyness. Real fear. The kind that lived deep inside people long after danger passed. Mia glanced toward the ballroom entrance near the donor tables. Ethan followed her line of sight naturally, without moving his head. A tall man in an expensive navy suit stood laughing beside two investors near the champagne tower. Late 40s. Silver cufflinks. Clean smile. Perfect posture. Completely forgettable to most people. But Ethan noticed the man, subtly watching Mia over the rim of his drink. Ethan's expression darkened by a fraction. "Daniel," he said softly to the bodyguard nearest him. Quietly. That one word was enough. Daniel immediately stepped away, touching the small earpiece beneath his collar without drawing attention. Ethan remained crouched near Mia while guests nearby pretended not to stare. One woman in diamonds looked visibly annoyed that the billionaire donor she had hoped to approach was now speaking to the daughter of a cleaning lady. Mia suddenly pulled her backpack closer against her chest. Ethan noticed the zipper was broken and one of the cartoon keychains hanging from it had been repaired with tape. Tiny details. Poor details. Invisible details. The kind nobody important ever noticed. "You are safe right now," Ethan said quietly enough that only Mia and Rachel could hear him. Mia's eyes widened slightly at those words. Then, after several seconds of silence, she slowly reached into her backpack with trembling fingers and pulled out a folded piece of paper no larger than a napkin. She hesitated before offering it to him. Ethan took it carefully. On the paper, written in uneven pencil letters, were 5 simple words. "The girls are downstairs tonight." The music kept playing. Champagne glasses kept clinking. Somewhere near the stage, people laughed at a joke. But Ethan Kong felt the entire room turn cold. Ethan Kong folded the small note once and slipped it into the inside pocket of his tuxedo jacket without changing expression. To everyone watching nearby, he looked calm, controlled, almost bored. But Daniel recognized the warning signs immediately. The slight tightening in Ethan's jaw. The dangerous stillness in his shoulders. The way his eyes stopped blinking when he was thinking too fast. Daniel returned less than 30 seconds later, moving quietly through the ballroom crowd while pretending to check his phone. "The lower service elevator was disabled 20 minutes ago," he murmured carefully beside Ethan. Security cameras near the basement storage corridor were also disconnected. Ethan's eyes darkened. Who authorized that? No record yet. Rachel stood frozen beside the cleaning cart, gripping a polishing cloth so tightly her knuckles had turned pale. She could feel wealthy guests staring at her now with growing irritation, whispering about why Ethan Kong was wasting time beside hotel staff instead of greeting donors. A man in a velvet dinner jacket rolled his eyes openly as he passed. "Unbelievable," he muttered to his wife. "Every charity event turns into some kind of scene." Ethan heard him. He simply did not care. His attention remained on Mia, who had quietly stepped closer to her mother while keeping her eyes fixed on the ballroom entrance. "How do you know about downstairs?" Ethan asked softly. Mia hesitated. Her small fingers rubbed nervously against the torn edge of her backpack strap. Rachel swallowed hard before answering for her. "Sir, I think we should go." Ethan looked at Rachel slowly. "Your daughter believes someone is in danger." Rachel's eyes filled with panic instead of relief. That alone told Ethan everything. She already knew something was wrong. Before she could respond, the man in the navy suit near the champagne tower started walking toward them with smooth confidence. His polished smile never reached his eyes. "Mr. Kong," he greeted warmly, extending his hand. "I was wondering when I would finally get the chance to speak with you tonight." Ethan stood upright again in one controlled motion. The difference in height and presence between the two men became instantly obvious. "Victor Lane," Ethan said evenly, ignoring the offered handshake. "I know who you are." Victor laughed lightly as if they were old friends. "Then you know I support excellent causes." His eyes briefly shifted toward Mia and Rachel before returning to Ethan. "It is important to help vulnerable children. Do you not agree?" Mia immediately stepped behind her mother. Ethan noticed it. So did Victor. The ballroom lights reflected softly across Victor's expensive silver watch, while jazz music drifted through the room like nothing dangerous existed beneath the surface. But Ethan saw the tension hidden underneath Victor's smile now. Predatory. Calculating. "Excuse us," Victor said pleasantly. "I think the young lady may have misunderstood something earlier. Children have active imaginations." Rachel quickly lowered her gaze. "Mia did not mean trouble, sir." Victor smiled at Rachel the way wealthy men often smiled at working people they considered invisible. "Of course not." Ethan remained silent for several seconds, long enough for the air between them to tighten. Around the ballroom, several donors had started watching openly now. Even the jazz band seemed quieter somehow. Then Ethan adjusted the cuff of his tuxedo calmly and spoke without looking away from Victor. "Daniel." "Yes, sir." "Seal every exit in the building." Victor's smile flickered for the first time. "I am sorry." Ethan's voice stayed cold and controlled. "Nobody leaves this hotel until I see what is downstairs." The room did not erupt into panic immediately. Instead, something stranger happened. Silence spread slowly through the ballroom table by table as guests noticed security teams moving toward the elevators and exits. Champagne glasses lowered halfway to lips. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Mia looked up at Ethan with wide, uncertain eyes, while Rachel's breathing became uneven beside her. Victor Lane forced another smile, but a thin line of sweat had already appeared near his collar. And for the first time all night, Ethan Kong looked less like a businessman attending a charity gala and more like the man Chicago whispered about in private. The ballroom no longer felt elegant after Ethan Kong ordered the exits sealed. It felt trapped. Guests shifted nervously beneath the chandelier light as security teams quietly moved into position near elevators, stairwells, and service corridors. Expensive smiles disappeared. Waiters stopped mid-step holding silver trays while whispers spread faster than the jazz music still playing in the background. Nobody understood what was happening, but everyone understood something was wrong. Victor Lane kept his expression carefully controlled, though his fingers had stopped resting naturally at his sides. "Mr. Kong," he said with a polite laugh that sounded thinner now. "Surely this is unnecessary. We are at a children's charity event." Ethan adjusted the sleeve of his tuxedo with calm precision. "Exactly." The single word landed like cold steel between them. Nearby donors began stepping away instinctively, sensing danger they could not name. Rachel stood frozen beside Mia, one protective hand resting against her daughter's shoulder. "Please," she whispered quietly toward Ethan. "We really do not want trouble." Ethan looked at her for a long moment before answering. "Trouble was already here before you arrived tonight." Mia's eyes lifted toward him again. For the first time since the conversation began, she looked slightly less afraid. Then Daniel's voice crackled softly through his earpiece. "Sir, we found 6 minors downstairs near the west storage corridor." Every sound in the ballroom seemed to disappear at once. Victor Lane's face lost color so quickly it was almost invisible unless someone was watching carefully. Ethan was watching carefully. "What exactly do you mean found?" Victor interrupted sharply before Daniel could continue. Too sharply. Too quickly. Several nearby guests turned toward him immediately. Ethan noticed that too. Daniel continued speaking through the earpiece. "The girls were hidden inside 2 locked catering rooms beside the freight elevator. Hotel staff claimed they were told not to access the area tonight." A woman near the donor tables gasped quietly. Another guest lowered his champagne glass with trembling fingers. The illusion of the glamorous charity gala was beginning to crack beneath the surface. Victor forced another smile, but sweat now glistened near his temples under the ballroom lights. "This is obviously some misunderstanding," he said quickly. "Perhaps frightened runaway teens or undocumented workers." People jump to conclusions too easily these days. Ethan took one slow step closer to him. Children are not misunderstandings. Victor's jaw tightened. Around them, wealthy donors who had spent the evening boasting about generosity suddenly looked uncomfortable standing too close to him. The distance grew naturally. Human instinct. Nobody wanted to be beside the wrong man when power shifted rooms. Rachel slowly knelt beside Mia. "Baby," she whispered shakily. "How did you know?" Mia hesitated before answering in the softest voice Ethan had heard all night. "I saw them bring the girls through the kitchen hallway." Rachel's eyes widened in horror. "Why did you not tell me?" Mia looked down at the floor. "The man said bad things happen to people who talk." Ethan's expression darkened instantly. Victor laughed again, but this time nobody joined him. "You are really trusting a frightened child over respected donors." Ethan finally turned fully toward Victor. The ballroom had gone almost completely silent now, except for distant piano music drifting awkwardly through the speakers. Every guest nearby watched without pretending otherwise anymore. Ethan's voice remained perfectly calm. A frightened child had more courage tonight than everyone else in this room combined. Victor's smile disappeared completely. Then Daniel emerged from the hallway near the elevators with two police detectives following close behind. One detective carried a small pink backpack decorated with cartoon rabbits and broken glitter stars. Mia's breathing stopped for a second when she recognized it instantly. Ethan noticed the fear return to her eyes. Daniel spoke quietly beside him. "The girls downstairs said this backpack belongs to another child who disappeared earlier this week." The detective carefully placed the backpack onto a nearby table beneath the golden chandelier light. The entire ballroom stared at it in silence. And suddenly the little girl beside the cleaning cart no longer looked invisible at all. The silence inside the Whitmore Grand Hotel ballroom no longer felt elegant. It felt heavy, dangerous. Every pair of eyes remained fixed on the small pink backpack sitting beneath the chandelier lights like evidence nobody wanted to acknowledge. A few guests quietly stepped farther away from Victor Lane now, careful not to draw attention to themselves while pretending they had never stood near him at all. The shift was subtle but unmistakable. Power had changed direction in the room. Victor noticed it too. "This is absurd," he snapped suddenly, his polished voice cracking for the first time that night. "You cannot humiliate respected people based on stories from frightened children." Ethan Kong did not even glance at him. His attention remained on Mia, who stood pressed against her mother's side while staring at the backpack with pale, frightened eyes. "Whose bag is that?" Ethan asked gently. Mia swallowed hard before answering. "A girl named Sophie." Rachel looked down at her daughter in confusion. "You know her?" Mia nodded slowly. "She was crying downstairs." Several nearby guests visibly reacted to those words. One woman covered her mouth. Another donor quietly set down his wine glass with shaking fingers. Nobody in the ballroom wanted to hear a child describing fear so calmly. Ethan crouched slightly again, lowering his voice. "When did you see her?" Mia's fingers trembled against her backpack strap. "Before the party started. A man took her through the kitchen hallway." Ethan's expression remained unreadable, but Daniel saw his right hand slowly close into a fist beside his tuxedo sleeve. "Which man?" Ethan asked. Mia looked up carefully. Then her eyes moved toward Victor Lane. The ballroom seemed to stop breathing. Victor laughed sharply, but the sound came out forced and hollow. "This is insane. She is a child." "Yes," Ethan replied coldly. "That is exactly why I believe her." The words landed harder than shouting ever could. Victor's jaw tightened. "You are making a very expensive mistake tonight, Mr. Kong." Ethan finally turned toward him completely. "Children are not business expenses." Nearby police detectives quietly began escorting several hotel employees toward the elevators for questioning, while security teams sealed additional hallways. Through the open ballroom doors, flashing blue and red lights now reflected faintly across the marble lobby downstairs. The gala had transformed into something else entirely. Rachel looked overwhelmed. "Mia," she whispered shakily. "Why did you not tell me earlier?" Mia stared at the floor. "Because the girls were scared." Her small voice nearly disappeared beneath the soft piano music still drifting awkwardly through the ballroom speakers. "And because he saw me watching." Rachel pulled her daughter closer instantly. Ethan's eyes sharpened. "Who saw you?" Mia slowly lifted her hand and pointed again toward Victor Lane. This time there was no hesitation, no uncertainty. patience that had made powerful men fear him for years. But tonight there was something else beneath that stillness. Anger. Not loud anger. Not reckless anger. The dangerous kind that became quieter the more serious it grew. Mia clung tightly to her mother's hand, while reporters near the ballroom entrance whispered excitedly into their phones as police continued arriving downstairs. Expensive donors who had spent the evening celebrating their generosity now looked desperate to distance themselves from the growing scandal unfolding under the chandeliers. Victor Lane attempted one last smile for the cameras, but nobody around him looked convinced anymore. The detective holding the evidence bag stepped toward the hotel worker near the hallway. "We found your access card near the locked storage rooms downstairs," she said firmly. The man's face drained of color. "I did not know what was happening down there," he answered too quickly. "I was just following instructions." "Whose instructions?" Silence. The detective repeated the question. "Whose instructions?" The worker's eyes shifted toward Victor Lane for less than a second. That was enough. Around the ballroom, people inhaled sharply. Victor immediately straightened his tuxedo jacket. "This is becoming ridiculous," he snapped. "You are trying to destroy my reputation because a terrified child pointed at me." Ethan finally stepped toward him slowly. The ballroom parted naturally around him without anyone realizing they were moving. "No," Ethan said calmly. "You destroyed your own reputation the moment children became afraid of you." The words landed harder than any accusation. Rachel looked down at Mia with tears forming in her eyes now. "Baby," she whispered softly, brushing curls away from her daughter's forehead. "You did the right thing." Mia's lower lip trembled slightly. "I thought nobody would believe me." Ethan heard that. Something in his expression shifted almost invisibly, because he remembered what it felt like growing up in neighborhoods where frightened children learned very early that adults usually looked away from ugly truths. The detective beside the hotel worker opened a tablet showing security. Footage recovered from backup cameras outside the loading dock. Grainy video displayed several young girls being escorted through a side entrance earlier that evening by hotel staff, avoiding the main lobby. A horrified murmur spread through the ballroom as guests realized the charity gala upstairs had hidden something monstrous beneath it all night long. One older donor quietly removed the foundation pin from his lapel and slipped it into his pocket, as if ashamed to wear it now. Victor's polished confidence finally cracked completely. "You cannot tie this to me," he said sharply. "I fund dozens of charities across the country." Ethan stopped directly in front of him. Good men do not need frightened children to defend them. The room went silent again. Even the cameras lowered slightly as everyone watched Victor Lane standing speechless for the first time all evening. Then Mia suddenly tugged gently on Ethan's sleeve. It startled everyone nearby because nobody touched Ethan Kong casually. Ever. He looked down immediately. Mia pointed toward the service hallway where the hotel worker had begun quietly crying under questioning. "He is scared too," she whispered softly. Ethan studied the trembling man for a long moment. Then he looked back at Mia with something unfamiliar in his eyes. Respect. Because in a ballroom full of wealthy adults obsessed with reputation, power, and appearances, the only person who still saw human fear clearly was the little girl everyone else had ignored. Police officers continued moving quietly through the ballroom, while detectives escorted several hotel employees toward the elevators for questioning. The glamorous charity gala had completely collapsed now into nervous whispers, flashing cameras, and shaken donors pretending they had never ignored the warning signs around them. Some guests slipped toward corners of the room, checking social media feeds with pale faces as local news stations began broadcasting live outside the hotel entrance. But near the cleaning station beneath the chandeliers, Ethan Kong paid attention to none of it. His focus remained on Mia Brooks. The little girl sat quietly in a ballroom chair now, her small sneakers dangling several inches above the marble floor, while Rachel knelt beside her adjusting the sleeves of Mia's oversized cardigan with trembling hands. Ethan watched the way Rachel touched her daughter carefully, protectively, like someone terrified the world might break her child if she loosened her grip even for a second. "She should sit somewhere quieter," Ethan said softly. Rachel looked surprised by the gentleness in his voice. "She is okay," she answered automatically, though her expression suggested she was trying to convince herself more than him. Ethan glanced around the ballroom filled with reporters, detectives, and frightened socialites. No child is okay in a room like this. Rachel lowered her eyes. For several seconds, neither of them spoke. Then Mia quietly asked the question nobody else had noticed mattered. Did they find Sophie? Ethan crouched beside her chair again, without hesitation despite dozens of cameras nearby, capturing every movement. Yes, he answered carefully. She is safe. Mia's shoulders relaxed for the first time all night. Rachel suddenly covered her mouth as tears filled her eyes. Ethan noticed immediately. You knew something like this could happen before tonight, he said quietly. Rachel hesitated. Then she nodded once. A few weeks ago, Mia stopped sleeping through the night, she admitted softly. She kept saying she saw girls crying near the hotel kitchens when I brought her to work with me. Ethan remained silent, letting her continue. I thought she was having nightmares again. Mia stared down at her hands. They were not nightmares. Rachel's voice cracked slightly. 6 months ago, Mia disappeared for 3 hours at a bus station while I was working double shifts downtown. Ethan's expression hardened instantly. Rachel wiped her eyes quickly, embarrassed to cry in front of strangers. A security guard found her hiding near a vending machine before anyone could take her anywhere. The ballroom noise around them suddenly felt far away. After that, Rachel continued quietly. She changed. She stopped talking much, started noticing strange things everywhere. Faces, signals, behaviors. Ethan understood now. Fear had trained Mia to survive by observing what adults ignored. Rachel looked exhausted as she spoke, years older than she probably was. I took her to therapists, school counselors, churches. Most people told me she was traumatized and imagining danger because she was scared all the time. Mia's small voice interrupted softly. But the signs were real. Ethan looked at her carefully. She was not saying it for attention. Not dramatically. Just truthfully. Like a child forced to grow older too early. Nearby, Victor Lane was being escorted toward a private conference room by detectives, while reporters shouted questions from behind hotel security barriers. But Mia barely looked at him anymore. Her attention stayed fixed on Ethan. Why did you believe me? She asked quietly. The question caught Rachel off guard too. Ethan did not answer immediately. He looked around the ballroom first. At the wealthy donors avoiding eye contact now. At the politicians pretending shock. At the people who had ignored a frightened little girl standing beside a cleaning cart all night long because they assumed invisible people had nothing important to say. Then Ethan looked back at Mia. Because scared children do not invent that kind of fear, he answered softly. The room around them continued buzzing with scandal and cameras and collapsing reputations, but for several seconds none of it seemed to matter. Because beneath the crystal chandeliers of a luxury hotel filled with powerful adults, a little girl who nobody had listened to for months was finally being heard. 3 days later, rain slid softly down the tall windows of St. Catherine's Children's Hospital, while Mia Brooks sat cross-legged at a small table inside the pediatric observation room, coloring quietly with dull crayons someone had left behind earlier that morning. The room smelled faintly like disinfectant and warm soup from the cafeteria downstairs, but for the first time in months Mia did not seem tense. She looked tired. Safe, but tired. Rachel slept in the chair near the window wrapped in a thin hospital blanket after nearly 48 hours without real rest. The television mounted in the corner played muted news coverage about the scandal at the Whitmore Grand Hotel. Reporters stood outside federal buildings discussing arrests, investigations, and missing financial records connected to Victor Lane's foundation. But inside room 214, none of that mattered much anymore. Mia carefully colored a tiny blue bird inside a picture book while rain tapped gently against the glass. Then the hallway outside grew strangely quiet. Nurses glanced up from the station near the elevators. A few seconds later, Ethan Kong stepped through the doorway carrying a plain white paper bag from a bakery downtown. No bodyguards. No tailored black overcoat filled with security radios. Just Ethan in a charcoal sweater with rainwater still clinging lightly to his sleeves. Rachel woke instantly the moment she saw him. Panic crossed her exhausted face before embarrassment replaced it. I am sorry, she said quickly, standing too fast. I did not realize you were coming. Ethan shook his head once. You should sleep when you can. He placed the bakery bag gently onto the table beside Mia. The nurse said chocolate chip pancakes are acceptable today. Mia looked up slowly. You remembered. Ethan almost smiled. Almost. You mentioned them at the hotel. Rachel stared at him quietly, still struggling to understand why one of the most feared men in Chicago kept showing up for her daughter. Ethan noticed the untouched coloring pages spread across Mia's table. "Any good artists in here?" Mia nodded slightly before pushing one page toward him. It showed a little girl standing beneath a giant chandelier beside a tall man drawn entirely in black ink. Ethan studied it longer than expected. "That is supposed to be you," Mia explained softly. "I figured." The room settled into an unfamiliar kind of silence after that. Peaceful. Ethan sat across from Mia at the tiny children's table that looked absurdly small beneath his broad shoulders, while she pushed a crayon box toward him without speaking. Rachel watched in disbelief as Ethan Kong, the man politicians whispered about and businessmen feared crossing, quietly began coloring inside a cartoon lion with careful concentration while rain continued tapping softly against the windows. No. Phones rang. No security teams interrupted. No reporters followed him there. Just a little girl and a man who understood fear more than either of them could explain out loud. After several minutes, Mia finally spoke again. "Are the other girls okay?" Ethan set down the crayon slowly. "Yes." "Did they go home?" "Some did. Some are staying somewhere safe until family can be found." Mia absorbed that quietly while continuing to color. "Good." Rachel looked away quickly, wiping tears before either of them noticed. Ethan pretended not to see her crying because dignity mattered to people who spent their lives surviving. Mia suddenly held up another drawing. This one showed several small girls standing outside beneath sunlight, while a tall figure blocked a dark doorway behind them. Ethan studied the picture carefully. "Who is that?" he asked. Mia looked at him with complete honesty. "You." Something shifted across Ethan's face then. Not pride. Something sadder. Softer. Like a man unaccustomed to being seen as safe by anyone. The rain outside slowed to a quiet drizzle while hospital machines hummed softly in distant rooms down the hallway. Then Mia asked the question that made Ethan go completely still. "Do bad men ever become good?" Rachel inhaled sharply, horrified her daughter had asked something so direct. But Ethan remained silent for several seconds before answering. "Sometimes," he said quietly. "The ones who still protect children have a chance." Mia nodded slowly as if that answer made perfect sense to her. And in the quiet hospital room filled with crayons, rainwater, and exhausted kindness, Ethan Kong realized something he had not felt in years. Peace. 2 months later, winter sunlight spilled softly across the sidewalks of downtown Chicago, while people hurried past steaming coffee carts and glowing store windows wrapped in Christmas decorations. News about the Whitmore Grand Hotel scandal had slowly faded from headlines, replaced by politics, celebrity drama, and stock market reports the world would forget again next week. Victor Lane's foundation no longer existed. Several investigations remained ongoing behind closed doors. More children had been reunited with families. Quiet justice had continued long after the cameras left. But inside a small neighborhood art center on the north side of the city, none of that mattered much to Mia Brooks as she sat cross-legged on the floor surrounded by construction paper, markers, and half-finished drawings taped to the walls. The room smelled like crayons and hot chocolate from the community kitchen downstairs. Laughter echoed softly through the hallway where children painted cardboard snowflakes, while volunteers carried boxes of donated winter coats into storage rooms. Rachel stood near the front desk speaking with another parent. And for the first time in years there was no exhaustion buried behind her smile. Life was still hard. Bills still existed. Rent still arrived every month. But fear no longer followed them everywhere like a shadow. Mia carefully added blue color to the wings of a paper bird when the front door opened quietly behind her. Several volunteers immediately straightened in surprise. Ethan Kong stepped inside wearing a dark wool coat dusted lightly with snowflakes from outside. He carried no security detail, no assistants, just a flat rectangular box tucked beneath one arm. Mia looked up instantly. "You came." Ethan removed his gloves slowly. "You invited me." Rachel walked over looking both nervous and grateful at the same time. "You really did not have to keep doing this," she said softly. Ethan glanced around the crowded little art center filled with children laughing over cheap craft supplies and donated snacks. "Yes," he replied simply. "I did." Mia stood and walked toward him, holding a small paintbrush between her fingers. She no longer looked frightened when she saw him. That alone still surprised Ethan more than he liked admitting. "What is in the box?" she asked. Ethan handed it to her carefully. Inside sat a brand new watercolor paint set with dozens of colors arranged neatly beneath clear plastic wrapping. Mia's eyes widened slowly. "These are real professional paints." Ethan shrugged lightly. "The art teacher said you were talented." Mia looked down at the paints for several seconds before hugging the box tightly against her chest. Then she did something that made every adult in the room pause. She stepped forward and wrapped her small arms around Ethan's waist without hesitation. The entire room seemed to go still. Rachel covered her mouth instantly, emotional for reasons she could not fully explain. Ethan froze too. Men like him were not touched gently very often. Slowly, awkwardly, he rested one hand against Mia's shoulder while snow drifted quietly outside the windows behind them. A little boy near the craft table whispered loudly to another child, "Is that her dad?" Rachel started apologizing immediately, embarrassed. "Mia, honey, do not." Ethan quietly interrupted her. "It is okay." Mia finally stepped back, holding the watercolor set carefully. "I made something for you too." She ran toward the art wall and returned holding a framed drawing protected beneath cheap plastic wrapping. Ethan studied the picture silently. It showed a crowded ballroom beneath giant chandeliers. Wealthy adults stood frozen in the background, while one little girl beside a cleaning cart pointed toward a dark hallway. In the center stood a tall man blocking the doorway with his back turned toward the danger behind him. Across the bottom, written in careful, uneven handwriting, were 6 small words. "Thank you for listening to me." Ethan stared at the drawing longer than anyone expected. The noisy art center around him faded into soft background sound, while snow continued falling quietly outside. Finally, he looked down at Mia. "Most people would not have spoken up that night," he said quietly. Mia shrugged softly. "Somebody needed to." Ethan nodded once. Because she was right. In a ballroom full of powerful adults, expensive suits, and polished speeches about protecting children, the bravest person in the room had been a little girl everyone almost ignored. And on the day Ethan Kong met Mia Brooks, the world reminded him what dignity looked like.